Here with Mike with more writing tips.
Hey folks, you see me wearing the deerstalker cap. You know it's got something to do with Sherlock Holmes. And it does, but it's really more about Victorian language, which I find fascinating and which millions of Americans and people all over the world still find fascinating because Sherlock Holmes is the most popular fictional character of all time. This is a book by a friend of mine, The Strange Case of Dr. Doyle. It's a biography of Holmes and also a blow by blow recitation of Arthur Conan Doyle's attempt to solve the Jack the Ripper killings. And this is a true event that he held. It took place in 1903, 20 years after Jack the Ripper's heyday, when he invited a bunch of scholars to join him on a tour of Whitechapel, where the killings took place. Whitechapel has always been a very seedy section of Los Angeles, of London. It's like the Bronx is to New York. But what fascinates me is the Victorian language. And we can't get enough of it, or Frankenstein and Quatermain and Sherlock Holmes. We would not still be fascinated by those works of fiction today. And we read them and we get into the habit of thinking in Victorian language. There's a thing about Victorian language. It's dripping with respect for the most part, class consciousness, and formality. It never addresses things in crude, head-on terms. And the use of adjectives is out the chart. So let me just read a little bit to you from Dr. Friedman's book. And this is when they first start to gather in Whitechapel. Holmes is waiting for the people he invited. The gentleman in the gray suit recognized Doyle immediately. Pardon our tardiness, Sir Arthur, but we were unaware of just how long it takes to walk here from our hotel, he said, extending his thin arm towards Doyle in greeting. I am Matthew Stanton, and this is my younger brother, Evander. With that, the gentleman in blue offered his hand in salutation. As is his usual fashion, my brother has taken the liberty of speaking for me, he said. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Evander Stanton, and it is my distinct pleasure to meet you. So you note the formality of the language. There are no contractions. There's no vulgarity. Let's go on. Once again, one member of the duo insisted on speaking for both. The lady in the straw hat confidently extended her hand to Doyle and firmly squeezed it. Note the firmly. Glad to meet you, Sir Arthur, she said. I am Gertrude Pemberton, Max Pemberton's niece, and this is Adelaide Oddie. Adelaide curtsied demurely. She didn't just curtsy. She curtsied demurely. Doyle was a bit taken aback by the forthright actions of Miss Pemberton, who by now was already in the process of introducing herself and Miss Oddie to the Stanton brothers. We're going to skip a paragraph. The dandy made it a point to introduce himself to Doyle with dispatch. He didn't just introduce himself. He introduced himself with dispatch. Sir Arthur, I'm Edgar Collins, nephew of your friend, Professor John Churton Collins, he said. I am quite honored by your invitation. He's not just honored, he's quite honored. And it is a privilege to be in the company of my literary idol, the man whose imagination gave birth to the world's greatest detective. Your stories provided me with a haven from my studies at Oxford and allowed me to reinvigorate myself after my examinations. Such fine studies of the human mind. My dreams were filled with visions of exploring Baker Street with the creator of Sherlock Holmes. I'm happy to know that my work has managed to enter that citadel of higher learning, Doyle said. And who might be this handsome chap standing next to you, Mr. Collins? Sir Arthur, I am Carrington Lambton, and I, too, am grateful for this extraordinary opportunity. It's not just an opportunity. It's an extraordinary opportunity. The second gentleman said, like Mr. Collins here, I enjoy the good fortune of being related to one of your colleagues. My great uncle, Arthur Lambton, has spoken glowingly of your myriad achievements on behalf of the Commonwealth. I hope you're counting these adjectives. A knight bachelor, that speaks for itself. Quite kind of you, Mr. Lambton, Doyle said. But of all things, it is your status on the cricket field that impresses my uncle the most. Yes, among all things, my favorite pastime. I'm going to jump ahead. Dr. Hammond, I presume, Doyle said. So nice to have you here on our side of the Atlantic. I hope you had a pleasant journey across the sea. In fact, I did, Dr. Hammond said. There weren't too many rough spots, and the sea air was delightful. I arrived here fully refreshed and with a clear mind. Fully refreshed. I'm glad to hear that, Doyle said. And with the advent of the transatlantic cable and the recent advances in shipbuilding, our two great nations will hopefully be able to forge the inextricable link that will rightfully permit us to dominate world affairs. Dr. Doyle, I have not given much thought to this before, but now that you suggested it, my interest has been piqued. You're right. Such a union would have its mutual benefits. Yes, despite arguments against relinquishing autonomy, which exist on both sides of the pond, nevertheless, nothing should be ruled out. As Doyle was finishing his statement, an apparition dressed in a long trench coat sprung from out of nowhere. It turned and jumped in front of the group, startling the gathering with the greeting, "Cheerio, everyone. I hope you weren't waiting for me." This strange salutation wasn't the only thing that shocked the guests. The giraffe-like figure appeared to be no more than 18 years of age. Could have just said no more than 18. Acne blanketed his cheeks and forehead. His Adam's apple bulged, and he had an apparent lack of shoulders. He was all legs. Doyle did not bat an eyelash, but in lieu of shaking the adolescent's hand, he placed his right arm around the boy's shoulder. "Glad you could make it," Doyle said. "Quite the deer stalker cap you have on." "Thank you very much, Sir Arthur," the young man said. "My hope is to follow in your footsteps. I have read everything of yours that I've been able to get my hands on, and I hope I can measure up. Mr. Mitchell, I think you have a lot of potential. I have certainly enjoyed reading the treasure trove of letters you sent me over the past 5 months." So you notice the affirmation and the use of adjectives to give emphasis and greater meaning and underscore whatever verb that they're modifying. And that's the Victorian style. And it prevents people from saying vulgarities. You never hear anybody cursing each other out in language like this. They might have it in the Whitechapel when there's no toffs around. By toffs, we mean the upper class, the upper middle class. But even then, the language of the lower classes was circumspect. They would never come right out and say anything vulgar like, "Did you shit your pants?" That would never be said in Victorian England. I think it's one of the fascinations that we have of Sherlock Holmes in reading him, and the hundreds and hundreds of Sherlock Holmes novels that have been written since Arthur Conan Doyle's death. They all adhere to this Victorian style of speaking and writing, which you absorb when you read Sherlock Holmes so that it becomes second nature, and that's how people are able to write that way. So that's it. It's just a comparison of how the language has changed, not necessarily for the better.
All right, very good. And we can find different books and comic books you've written at baroncomics.com, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And by the way, Sherlock Holmes Leviathan, which is my own contribution, is at the printer now, and we will begin fulfilling in early April.
Okay, all right. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching.